All right. I think we can start. I think we have more than enough people right now for us to be able to really properly participate in this session. So I'm also really excited to start because it is the first webinar that we have this year. So good day, everyone, and welcome again to any new people in the crowd. Welcome back to anyone who has attended our previous sessions in the past. So I've also hosted the other webinar sessions. My name is Tamara Mosqueda, and I am from the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, or ICLR. So just a bit of a backgrounder, ICLR is a research institute, and as of this year, we're actually now a charity. We mostly focus on risk reduction research and measures for the built environment. So for a bit of context, the PIEVC was created in 2005. It was co-founded by NRCan and Engineers Canada, and as of March 2020, operations were assumed by the PIEVC Program Alliance, which are ICLR, Climate Risk Institute, and GIZ. So this PIEVC webinar was brought back last year in order for us to have this platform, right? So we can hear about the different build projects that utilize PIEVC, whichever part in the process, in the beginning or in the middle. And we want to hear why they've decided to use the PIEVC resources. How did they come to the decision to basically use it? What was the process like? What are the results and what have they learned? And of course, what the recommendations are. So I think we all want to hear this from our presenters. And so today we have 3 presentations from 4 of our presenters. I'm very excited to introduce all of them. For the first presenter, we have Shafraz Kaba. He's a senior project manager in Stock Canada. And then we have Jesse Bigras Lauzon and Lawrence Grimmond from ACOM. So they're both climate change adaptation specialists. And lastly, we have Pipa Cookson Hills. She's also a climate adaptation specialist from the city of Calgary. So these are going to be their presentations. And then after that, we're going to have like a 20-minute Q&A discussion. So we have the Q&A chat box for everyone to input their questions. But before we continue, just a little bit of housekeeping notes that this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the PIEVC YouTube channel. So please feel free to use the Q&A box for the presentations to submit your questions and share your comments with fellow attendees. The more dynamic everyone is regarding their insights, of course, the more interesting our conversations are going to be. And all of your questions will be addressed at the end during our dedicated Q&A session. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing here. Oh, oops. Here we go. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to introduce our first presenter. So our first presenter is Shafraz Kaba. You can start sharing anytime, Shafraz. So he's a senior project manager from Stock Canada. He's a registered architect and he's experienced in climate resilience adaptation strategies with over 27 years of experience with sustainable design. He's also well known for his commitment to integrated community-based collaborative design. He was co-chair and a founding member of the Energy Transition and Climate Resilience Committee of Council for Edmonton, where he helped develop the community energy transition strategy and action plan. So his presentation today is going to be on climate resilience and adaptation for City of Edmonton fire halls using PIEVC. In essence, the City of Edmonton required PIEVC analysis for 2 new fire stations and provided this analysis to the design team to incorporate into the architecture, specifically Walker Fire Hall and Athlone Fire Hall. I'm going to let Shafraz talk more about the presentation, but he will basically show us the co-benefits of these measures for occupant health, building sustainability, and carbon reduction. Shafraz, you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Tamara, for the introduction. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. I need to talk fast because there's lots to get through, having chosen 2 fire halls to talk about. So as we all know, we're facing a serious challenge. I myself, as Tamara said, am a recovering architect, and I am fueled by this definite climate anxiety. I'm grateful that our industry, our profession, frankly, has finally acknowledged that we need to design buildings differently. And I think we have a lot of work to do. So I'm going to talk about 2 sites in Edmonton. One is Athlone in a mature neighborhood, which was a site for a potential school that was never built. So this is just the corner of that site showing a bit of that green playing field for the community at the moment. And the Walker community, which is actually a new neighborhood recently built as a subdivision on the southeast side of Edmonton. Um, so the amazing part of my work with the City of Edmonton on the Energy Transition and Climate Resilience Committee was developing requirements for city buildings to follow policy and direction on climate risk. And I'm glad to show now that this is becoming embedded in their proposal calls and the requirements for projects. So we were lucky enough to work with a team that won the proposals for developing two fire stations with a 546 architecture out of Winnipeg and partnered with ACI Architects in Edmonton. And we were given the scope to help with the climate risk assessment and sustainability and lead aspects of that. The great thing is this will also be a particular lead credit for innovation as part of the whole process. And as many of you probably understand, in reviewing PIEVC for occupant and building impacts, we definitely took a holistic building approach with life safety affecting the building staff and public, architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil systems in a way that hopefully is helping the design team kind of build in a better project at the end of the day. I should mention that these two fire halls have yet to start construction. We are just finishing the design phase, and as part of that, that's the right time and place to really help the team really look at the climate parameters and understand the local regional data. So, City of Edmonton already mapped out the 2050, 2080 baselines and helped us really get a head start on our analysis. Particularly, we were concerned about overland flooding in both sites. So basically, we were hoping to really tackle some of that, as you'll see later in my presentation, how best to help, especially emergency services facility like a fire station, deal with the impacts of a very extreme rain event. So precipitation is increasing, and it's as we have seen it recently, even locally, there's been a significant sort of impact on how the city is tasking our local utility, EPCOR, in upgrade stormwater systems. So as we developed the risk scores, we were particularly looking at how these red dots popped up and how the risk matrix really focused on the aspects around civil and mechanical systems, and basically how that also led us to look at mechanical strategies, particularly in the light of ever increasing smoky summer seasons, how that will impact our mechanical ventilation requirements. Now, that was an interesting discussion when we talk ventilation and mechanical systems, because we're always trying to reduce the amount of energy buildings take, and to then suggest we need greater filtration or better mechanical ventilation that has the opposite effect on our energy model. So as you could see here, when we looked at what systems to really focus on, the mechanical, electrical, civil, and how it impacts building staff and public were our top priorities. And we're part of our greater debate or design iteration and analysis, and basically looking forward to 2080, as I mentioned, some of those risks really came to the fore on how to deal with the design. So one particular aspect which we have a hard time mitigating is the tornado risk. In Edmonton's past, we did a severe tornado in the late 80s, and we're hoping that does not happen again. But a lot of those risk mitigations we recommended to the design team focused on how to deal with heavy winds or intense rainfall and precipitation, as well as some of the building strategies for envelope risk mitigation. As you also see on this graph, mapping out impacts, very hot days are going to be a severe issue, and we are constantly now recommending air conditioning in every building in our region from day one, because we even currently are experiencing more and more hot summers and smoky summers, which again, when you pair a hot day and an inability to open up operable windows, you need air conditioning to help with the occupants' comfort. So basically, when we looked at the site options, this is Athlone in northwest Edmonton. The design team had this large surplus school site. They considered this location directly north of the library, which is that white kind of volume down below, as well as the other northeast corner and the northwest corner of the site. So some of the opportunities we had with our PIEVC analysis was helping them really understand, especially in light of the surface ponding and flood maps we received from EPCOR, where not to locate the building. And this was a tribute to our local utility EPCOR that is doing a lot of work showing through their historical data and their analysis of the current state of stormwater infrastructure, how bad things may get in our current neighborhoods, especially mature neighborhoods where they have lots of data to collect. So we basically had to point out that the northwest corner on this particular site was probably the least risky in terms of fire trucks being able to still meet their response time. We had quite a lot of back and forth with the fire department of how best to respond to locations they would have to go to. And as you see here, unfortunately, it's going to be a challenge for the fire department to access things that are south of basically 127th Avenue without having to divert around some of these potentially flooded streets. So we basically worked with the design team, showed this data. This helped them really pick the northwest corner of this site to sort of suggest as the best opportunity to work in. And this also set up the stage for how the design responded to things like solar exposure, the prevailing winds from the northwest, and access, as you see, as the city of Edmonton likes to build these pass-through type of fire hall facilities. It makes it easier for the trucks to sort of get cleaned up after a call, and how also it will sort of need 2 points of access typically as they go. The Walker site was also an interesting consideration on how best to deal with the location. As you see sort of on this diagram, there's a stormwater retention pond immediately to the west of the building. So we said option one is probably not greatest, as we again from EPCOR received some potential challenges on their pond surface ponding or roadway uh, risk flooding likelihood. So we definitely were helping the design team again look at the best particular options. If any of you know, Edmonton Ellerslie Road is kind of separated by this great median. So again, the access for fire halls is crucial to be able to get in any direction as quick as possible without having to worry about cross traffic. So this this was almost going to be the preferred site at any rate. The stormwater and potential overland flood risk, which is shown here in pink, was basically the the extra data we needed to say, hey, look at how this will kind of fall out. Um, as you see the pink area in our site, I would just like to say the site is going to be regraded, so we're able to influence when the fire hall facility is built, how basically the site grading can help divert or mitigate any of that overland flood risk that we're aware of. So again, that helped us really help understand with the design team and the civil engineer in particular, how the access, the storm, the roadways would work, so we can create a robust and sort of risk mitigated um, site. So a lot of our recommendations focused on how the overland flood, the extreme heat, and basically the future risks of smoky summers, even now, will impact that. So we built out a table with recommended adaptation measures and how some of the impact will be on initial capital costs. So we could help the design team and our City of Edmonton client manage the capital budgets. But also we had to work with the city to understand, do they need to allow for extra um, budget as an ongoing operational cost? So again, some of the mitigated measures actually will help prevent things from getting damaged or destroyed in the event of an extreme weather event, like the flooding of a floor material or whatnot. So we're able to help them actually show by building a more durable and frankly climate risk mitigated building, we're helping the city manage those risks and manage the costs going into the future. And so we did this sort of table for all of the building systems, architectural, landscape, mechanical, electrical. And as I mentioned, that was sort of um, the design workshop process we had with the design team, is like presenting what exactly this could look like and what things could happen. One of the fun parts, I as an architect or a not necessarily practicing architect, was able to do in this project is help the design team think about cladding and think about the external envelope. So as I mentioned, we pair um, the architectural and mechanical electrical systems together and try to find the best possible things that multi-solve the challenges we're facing. So in our PIEVC analysis with extreme wind or hail events, we uh, recommended to the design team, hey, you need to think about the material and the options for facing this building with something that's going to be durable. How are you going to protect the windows? How can you create overhangs or certain measures that can add to the architectural character? So the architects explored precast concrete panels shown here. They explored terracotta tiles, as well as a basically expanded aluminum cladding. And a lot of that was also filtered through a carbon lens. So part of our work as sustainability consultants is looking at the embodied carbon of these materials. And as probably many of you know, concrete is not a carbon friendly material. Neither is expanded aluminum. So we are looking at what is the best possible case options for the design team to help really mitigate. And we're probably landing on a metal panel of sorts, which is light, but also at a gauge that will resist potential hail issues. So I will probably stop there to allow other panelists to speak. I wish I could speak to every single measure we've debated, but I'm happy to carry on the discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shafraz. That was really interesting. I'm really glad you touched upon like reducing the carbon, basically in your in the construction. I think that's something that we would love to hear more about later in the Q&A. We have Pipa Cookson-Hills, who is a climate adaptation specialist in the city of Calgary. So Pipa is an atmospheric scientist working at the city of Calgary as a climate adaptation specialist. She also manages the climate risk assessment framework and historical and future climate data for the city. Pipa, you can start sharing your presentation, but essentially it is, again, in the climate risk assessment of the city of Calgary. And basically their team has developed an innovative customized climate risk assessment framework based on the PIEVC tools, and it adapted to meet their municipal needs, specifically that of implementation. So the framework she'll be presenting includes two different processes for assessing climate risk and resilience. The most robust climate risk and resilience assessment and the more condensed climate risk screening assessment, both including an implementation plan. Interesting. So both processes can be additionally tailored to the project and funding source. And the project managers at the City of Calgary can use one of these assessments for new builds or retrofit public infrastructure projects, and more recently to service delivery, depending on federal funding requirements, the project budget, and the design phase of the project. So people, welcome, and you can start your presentation.
Thanks, Tamara. Can you see my screen?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. You can see the presentation mode?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, happy to be here, everyone. Thanks so much for that introduction, Tamara. So my name is Pippa Cookson-Hills. Like Tamara was saying, I am a climate adaptation specialist working on the climate adaptation team at the City of Calgary. Calgary is also known as Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot language on Treaty 7 lands. The climate adaptation team at the City of Calgary, we really work as kind of an internal consultant team. We advise on climate adaptation across corporately. And I specifically manage the climate risk assessment framework at the City of Calgary and have been doing so for about the last 5 years, continuously evolving the process. I've spoken to PIEVC practitioners in the past about our risk assessment approach, and today I'm going to be speaking about that, but also a little bit more about a recent risk assessment completed for Calgary Transit. So what kind of risk assessments we do? I know Tamara touched on it. I'm going to have a surprise one here. We have three types really now. We have the climate risk and resilience assessment. We've been doing these for quite a while. I'll talk a little bit more about these in the next slide. Climate risk screening assessments, which we adapted to meet our needs. And then we also have we just completed a service line climate risk and resilience assessment. So that's kind of the semi-third type. And we do have a guidance document online as to how to go through, how to complete the first two types of assessments, these types of risk assessments. So if you're a consultant working on our projects, you know how to do that. Also have some other tools online I'll talk about. We have three main levers to do these types of risk assessments at the City of Calgary. So we have a sustainable building policy, which does require risk assessments to be completed for different types of new builds or retrofit projects. So that's where our risk assessment comes in there. We also have federal funding levers. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those. And then really we're seeing a lot of corporate due diligence lately, a lot of engineers and planners who want to assess climate risk because it's the right thing to do and because it's becoming ever more of an expectation. But it's also in alignment with our climate strategy, which City of Calgary put out in 2022. So I'm going to go through the three types that we're really working with here. So the first one, these climate risk and resilience assessments, these are for projects only. And I know AECOM just spoke about these, very similar. These two take about 3 to 5 months to complete on our end. I hire a consultant to do so. The project value is typically above $10 million. 2 to 3 workshops are involved. The cost is moderate. The staff involvement is quite moderate. You want to engage properly here. And we assess the risk of, we assess climate risk of high profile projects or costly infrastructure projects, or for funding reasons. And then we have, we knew that after doing a lot of these risk assessments that we needed something smaller, because we have got a lot of infrastructure projects at the City of Calgary. So a few years ago, I developed the climate risk screening assessment. It's very similar to what Vancouver does as well. And this can be completed on projects that are a lower dollar value, or just really for projects that we've done a lot of these types of risk assessments for. So we have a really good understanding of our climate risk to, say, field houses. So we might want to ask just for a screening risk assessment instead. This is a very much smaller process. It does involve a spreadsheet screening tool and also a project template that project managers can use to assess climate risk pretty quickly. This is available online if you want to check it out. And just to go through an example of what that looks like, you can select your exposure to different climate hazards. You can specify the consequences. This can be done by, typically it's the design consultant that does this process. And then they would work with the team internally to do this, to specify the consequences. And then identify, the unique thing about our tool is that we identify our own climate likelihoods based off of climate projections for the 2050s, 2080s time periods, RCP 8.5. And those are built into our tool. That's done for consistency. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then you get these risks that are spit out, and then you get resilience recommendations. And I want to say that resilience recommendations, I'm going to talk on that a little bit, are the key part for us, really. And then finally, we do have these more service line risk assessments that we just completed our first one for Calgary Transit. Calgary Transit, our largest business unit at the City of Calgary, with over around 5,000 employees. And I took a lot of workshops, quite a lot of money, a lot of presentations, a lot of management meetings. Over 100 staff were involved. And really the reason that this was so important is that we wanted an opportunity to basically prioritize resources, capital plan, and inform strategies. And so these are really for that purpose, whereas those project level risk assessments are for project specific risks and adaptation measures. They're both very important. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the transit one as we move on. So you might be wondering, we have all these great PIEVC tools. Why do you need your own? And that's a great question. So PIEVC tools are extremely valuable tools for any consultant who are looking to undergo a climate risk assessment. I've used these tools extensively in the past. I think they're fantastic. As a municipality, however, we need tools from the mindset of a municipality for an approach that's very focused on implementation and reduction of risk. And so I set out to standardize our approach a few years ago in line with ISO 14091 and PIEVC, but this was really adapted to meet our needs as a city. And they're really, really focused on completion, design, education, implementation, integration, but more than that, feasibility of implementation. And that's really, really critical. You can rank your risks, but if you've got a really, really high risk that's extremely expensive, is that feasible to implement? So we also have like a feasibility ranking, and that we also have a standardized consequence scoring rubric, our own climate profile and likelihoods that we use for each project, and a risk matrix. So we have our own risk matrix at the City of Calgary. The PIEVC tools are excellent and are written also from the standpoint of more of a consultant to a consultant for broader use. So we really had to drill down for our purposes. So for the CRSA in particular that you see here, that was drilled down for our purposes. It's simpler than the high-level screening guide. It's actually quite a bit simpler. It has the same risk calculation method and likelihood calculation method, but it doesn't include workshops. It includes a standardized risk climate profile and a heavy focus on climate risk treatment. So that's that. Also, we can adapt that for funding sources as well. The CRRA, that is most similar to the high-level screening guide, which is my personal favorite PIEVC resource. And it does use the same risk calculation and likelihood calculation from there. Workshops are included for these. That's a really key part of it, as well as education as part of those workshops. Risk treatment is a focus, but more than that, again, like I mentioned, feasibility is stressed. So we have about 3 workshops each for these, depending on the project, depending on the scale and the scope. One investigates climate impacts and consequences. Another investigates resilience measures and the feasibility of these measures. And that's important to say that these are developed by Calgary staff for Calgary staff. And that's really, really key because that speaks to that feasibility aspect. And it also takes it a step further. We also look at cost benefit. Municipalities are very about cost. So how much money will I save by adapting now? And then finally, the service line risk assessment that I'm going to be talking a little bit more about. It is similar again in the calculation of risk, but it also really dives into the risk to existing assets and services, and that's critical. Feasibility again is a huge focus, and an economic analysis is performed of the highest risks. And then I also want to mention too that from a municipality point of view, there's a little bit less of a focus on formal roles and designations. And if you're familiar with the PIEVC products, the suites, there's a large focus on formal roles. And there's a little bit less of that focus in our tools because we don't necessarily have all the right people. We really lean on our consultant to do that kind of work. So that's another key difference. So I want to dive into a little bit of that Calgary Transit Risk Assessment and Economic Analysis. So what did this consist of? And why did we do it? So we wanted to target a business unit with a lot of assets. Like I mentioned, this is our largest business unit at the City of Calgary. But more than that, it also has a plan in place already. Calgary Transit has this route ahead strategy, which outlines what the future of transit is going to look like in Calgary. And so within that strategy, they talk about the importance of reducing climate risk. So that was our essentially. That's why we targeted assessing risk to this business unit. What was really unique about this project is that we assessed climate risk to not just the assets, but also not just the assets that Calgary Transit owns and operates, but also their services. So not just the how of they deliver, and not just the what. So this type of project it was very new to us. And so an example of an asset would be like a bus. An example of a service would be the procurement of those buses. So for this project, we put on a lot of workshops, 3 different sets of workshop series, and engaged over, like I mentioned, 100 transit staff. We looked at hundreds of different climate impacts, risks, and developed resilience measures with transit staff for transit staff. And then we narrowed it down even further, and we had 20 interviews after the workshops to develop feasible solutions. So, okay, these are the recommendations we came up with in this workshop. What's feasible? And we sat down with the subject matter experts to really understand that. And then from there, not just what's feasible, what can we apply for funding? This really helped us whittle it down to 26 different measures that you see. You can actually see in the report. It's been made public now, of course, on PIEVC's website. So check that out if you want to nerd out one night. And from those 26 measures, we'd performed about 6 cost-benefit analyses. So again, what's really powerful here is that these recommendations were developed by staff for staff. And that's very, very powerful. And that really, really helps that implementation piece. So for example, in the workshops, a big impact to come out of this is that our substations for Calgary Transit are very, very hot in the summer. Sometimes they're too hot to work in, and sometimes they overheat. So we know that based off of our climate projections, that this will get much worse than a changing climate. And so a recommendation developed in the workshops by staff is to conduct an engineering study to identify substations nearing heat load capacity and forecasting future risks to inform strategic air conditioning implementation within these substations. So what we do know is that the impact analysis workshop is that many folks mentioned that this was a big issue for substations, and we even know the specific substations, but now we need to do a study in order to prioritize the ones that get AC. So now that's something that Calgary Transit can weave into their next 4-year budget cycle. Also, one of these recommendations we did apply for federal funding for, and we did receive it because of this risk assessment. And this is an example of potentially an unforeseen impact to the overhead catenary system in Calgary. Key takeaways from this assessment is that we know climate risk is increasing. Transit knows this now too, and we knew it before, but now they know, and this is documented very clearly. They also know what types of assets are most at risk as well. Their transit is fully aware and knows where and how to focus their efforts. They also have a lot of ways that they can make these assets more resilient now. And they know the approximate cost to do so, that of about $50 million phased over 7 years. So why complete these service line risk assessments? So these service line risk assessments really build on providing standardized, defensible climate risk to support better capital and operational decisions across service lines, rather than assessing project risk by project risk in isolation. That's very important too. This is more if you want that larger scale operational decision making tool. It's a great lever for that. I can't stress enough the importance of using these to build internal capacity. Like I mentioned, we engaged over 100 staff. And now people are bringing solutions that they learned in those workshops to their work and breaking down silos as a result. Also really supports grant readiness as well, like we saw. And accessing external funding. And like I mentioned, we were able to apply for and receive a grant from the Adaptation and Action Grant for a feasibility study for one of the recommendations from the risk assessment. And that's something that we had struggled with in the past in receiving that type of funding, because we did not have it clearly tied back to a plan or process. And now it is. And that was mentioned by the GMF team, the Green Municipal Fund team. And of course, these risk assessments do allow us to have cost savings and prioritize action through implementation. Okay, so now that we've done a successful risk assessment for Calgary Transit, what's next? Well, like all risk assessments as a municipality, you really want to make sure it's not a checkbox exercise. And so really want to help, like I mentioned, kind of a consulting role internally at the City of Calgary, really want to support transit in incorporating these and continuing to lean on these through planning and budgeting to guide future decisions. So where we're already seeing the results from the risk assessment to be being integrated, as an example, we are at the City of Calgary currently designing a train extension, an LRT extension. And so this station has now been designed above grade to remove the risk of a flooded trench, which could result in a sag to attract curvature to mitigate the risk of local track flooding in the event of hail and short duration, high intensity rainfall. Now, this would not have been done without the workshops, because the right folks were in the right room listening and heard at length about what makes good and bad design. So the people who design the infrastructure took that away. And then additionally, Calgary Transit is going to consider implementing some recommendations in the next budget cycle. We're going to keep looking at accessing federal funding. We're going to keep completing risk assessments. And we're actually going to be looking at another service line risk assessment here that does also tie back to another plan that the service line does have in place that does speak about reducing risk. And we're going to continue to do project-specific risk assessments where it makes sense, and really, really focusing on tracking implementation to show progress as well. So we're working on that, and then also providing internal training on how to undergo these risk assessments if you are, say, a project manager or an engineer. So how do you use these tools, and then how do you engage your consultant to be able to as well? Okay, that is all for me. If you want to get in touch, I'm Pippa Cookson-Hills at the City of Calgary.
Thank you so much, Piva. I think we have a lot of questions for everyone here. Before that, I would like to thank everyone for coming here, especially for the presenters. These are all really wonderful and insightful presentations, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us have learned a lot from everything that you have done or would be doing in the next few years for particular designs that are about to be constructed. I'm just going to give a really quick general question for everyone though. You can take like maybe 30 to 45 seconds maybe to answer them before we go into the more specific questions in our Q&A. Given that I am more in the social or the qualitative side, right, of like trying to see how people could be integrated in a project, making sure that everyone is on the table, making sure that everyone is heard. Collaboration can be pretty tricky, right? Everyone may have different experiences. They are not used to particular ways of using, let's say, a specific lens for construction or for design. So I do want to ask about everyone's sort of like lessons or things that they observed in terms of like how was the design phase, like your IDP sessions, right? Was there any major adjustment needed when it comes to considering things? Maybe they were most likely not initially considered in the initial part of the design. How did the reiterative process, the back and forth between all the participants take place? Like what was challenging about it? What was really good about it? Yeah, so just really quickly, we can start with maybe Chef Roz.
Sure. In our integrated workshops, I think the hardest part was understanding what not to double up or what not to create redundancy. And especially in an emergency facility like a fire station, it's like, oh, should we add generators? Should we have solar? Should we have a robust envelope? Like how to balance what we can do and what is required. And I think that was one of the lessons learned from a previous fire hall is like the city of Edmonton's own design requirements tended to over design and over redundant systems to be able to deal with all of these risks. So I think the beauty of this integration is really pushing that and understanding from the entire design team how to right size the systems and to leverage the idea of, something called tunneling through the cost barrier. So create a really good envelope, then it'll show you can reduce some of your mechanical electrical, then you get the thing costed by someone who really understands. And maybe that's the underlying message. It's like find the right cost to these things by asking the right people. So I'm glad to say the city of Edmonton now has a contractor on board who is helping manage the costing of all of these things.
Yeah, can you remind me what IDP is? I think we might be using different terminology.
It's basically the beginning of it's like integrated design process.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah. So maybe I'll just speak to the workshops and how do I get people on board from the beginning? It is a process. I would say understand what motivates people and what drives people. And even before that, get all the right people in the room. For example, with Calgary Transit, they had transit touches everything. Stormwater touches transit, operations and maintenance, of course. Parks and recreation, there's so many different pieces that touches transit. So get them on board, but also understand what their needs are ahead of time. Understand who are the people who are more vocal and perhaps maybe detractors, and talk to them ahead of time. Have one-on-ones with them and answer their questions. Even show them a presentation ahead of time. Make sure that the folks who are maybe a little bit more skeptical, you talk to first. Understand how you want to influence people, not to manipulate, of course, but to all work together to achieve the goals of the organization, leveraging things like maybe this can get you federal funding, that kind of thing. I just want to speak quickly. I saw that there was a question in the chat about the workshops, if they were online or in person. It totally depends, but for transit, it was all in person. And that was really, really critical. Having the workshops on site and coming to the people who you want to engage and get information from, right? Is really critical, and feeding them. I like to feed people. So those are all key things that I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pipa. So I'm going to go through the Q&A. Chef Raj, you already answered this question from regarding Edmonton's requirements, including vulnerability assessment. How have adaptive capacity and sensitivity assessments been considered before performing the risk assessment? So you did answer it, but there's a follow-up of like how you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because the Edmonton guide is not explicit on how to do it.
Sure. So basically, with the lead innovation credit, we kind of looked at the requirements of, sensitivities and how basically the City of Edmonton's resilience action plan provides guidance on known risks and known facilities that require that sensitivity, especially being an emergency service. As basically it's a building that requires post-disaster operation. So looking at not just the City of Edmonton's building and design standards, the climate action policy, and the lead credits, we basically negotiated what is needed with the City of Edmonton's project manager to be able to meet all of those particularities of requirements. Hopefully that gets clear. But yeah, I was trying to find a link to the actual action guide, which actually is being updated right now by the city. So I think they've taken down the old action guide that is not available right now. So if you like, I can send it to you.
For PIPA, how does the Calgary CRRA or CRSA feed into internal asset management practice or workflow in the city? For example, how are the assessment outcomes integrated into the city's process for prioritizing, trigger, and plan for capital and operational expenditures?
Yeah, I love that question. I had the exact same question myself. And for the Calgary Transit one, it was existing assets, right? So they're already built. So that's just a lot easier. You already have assets that the city owns. So we were really fortunate in that the timing of the risk assessment came right before Transit created their or updated their asset management plan. So it was fantastic. We were able to integrate the recommendations of the risk assessment directly into the update to their asset management plan. And the reason that we were able to do that is because, again, we had the right people in the room, and I cannot stress that enough, is that we invited the asset management team at the city. It's a little bit confusing how it's structured, but the asset management team at the city and the asset management team within Transit to get all into one room so that they were there and could communicate. And then that was an expectation. So again, also, I forgot to put a plug out to or shout out to our consultant as well. It's not that I do all of these by myself. Like our consultant for the transit work was Stantec, and they did a phenomenal job. And they were able to help us develop the scope and lead us to this very new process. So I want to make sure I mention that too.
In the Canadian context, there are a number of climate risk assessment frameworks currently in use. It would be helpful to understand how PIEVC is being positioned relative to these. From your experience, what makes the PIEVC the appropriate tool for these projects, and are there specific situations where you would consider alternative approaches more suitable? And how does that choice affect the defensibility of the outcomes, particularly when informing engineering decisions or capital planning? Shafraz?
Oh boy.
It's a
I
loaded
think
question.
from our perspective, that we were happy with the robustness of the tool. So it's looking at all of the building systems, and it allows the design team, the people to help navigate the choices for those systems. And then it's sort of a systematic way of looking at the risk, and likelihood and consequences is again factored by the context you're in. So I think from our perspective, it has been flexible and robust and usable, and also vetted by the committee itself to be able to sort of suit our needs. I don't know all of the other type of frameworks out there, so I really shouldn't or can't comment on how well it compares. But I'd be happy to learn if there's even other options. Well, risk analysis, this has been sort of the most useful and frankly easiest to utilize and develop. Thanks.
Pipa?
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I think PIEVC for me is like a fantastic umbrella, and there's so many tools. It's not just one PIEVC tool. There are amazing tools. So if you're a First Nation, using the First Nation Resilience Toolkit, that kind of thing. And for the city of Calgary, I was using these tools, and then also found that there was a little bit of a gap in what we needed. So adapting that process to meet our needs. When it comes to defensibility, though, it's a really good point, because it totally depends what you're using this for. If you're using a risk assessment to apply for federal funding, then you do need to make sure that the federal funding stream that you're applying for and the risk assessment that you're working with will meet it. So for example, there was the Canada Public Transit Fund, which has been changed now, but they had different requirements than, say, the old legacy climate lens. So every single funding stream typically has a different type of risk assessment requirement. So finding out What do you need? And then also even meeting with the funders, and that's what I've done before. Will this meet your needs? Is this acceptable? Does it line up with ISO? Does it line up with PIEVC? I think if you've got PIEVC lining up, then you should be. If PIEVC is good for a lot of these circumstances, but double checking with your funder, especially for that defensibility.
I do have a question for Pipa. So regarding the interviews, you mentioned that you have more than 20 interviews, right? So I guess I wanted to understand or have you expand on that experience. So for instance, like what are the things that you had to consider based on their expertise? What are the tools or approaches they used to analyze the huge quantity of answers that they had later? And so how helpful do you think that it was? And how did you basically decide to approach a lot of people, like right you're interviewing?
Yeah, it was so much work. I guess I can say that. Like, you can't just do one of these easily off the side of your desk. Like, it was my job for the large part of a year. And it was extremely helpful. And the reason why it was helpful, we had these workshops. One of the workshops was identifying resilience measures. We worked for 3 hours to identify resilience measures across, there were 30 or 40 staff in the room for this workshop. And everyone has thoughts and everyone has ideas, but these resilience measures that you get at the end of the day, they might not be feasible for the subject matter expert who needs to implement them. So for example, one of the recommendations was to install drinking water fountains at all of these different train stations in the city. And that was recommended by someone who was not an expert. And I also have a lot of learnings from this also. So this is one takeaway as well. But meeting with that subject matter expert, he said, oh, actually, that's not possible because of X. We do not have the water set up here. So can we do this instead? So realize it was completely infeasible from a standpoint of both cost, but also the infrastructure that was there and available. Because again, remember, we were working with existing infrastructure and not new build infrastructure, which I think you have a little bit more flexibility around. So yeah, we revised the recommendations completely from the workshops through the interviews and then onwards, and then had to get management approval on them as well afterwards.
Thank you. One general question for everyone is after the entire process, right? For chafras, like it's still about to be built, but for others, it has, for example, for everyone else, the building is ready or is already constructed. So do you keep, or for chafras, will you, I guess, keep a feedback channel open for after the construction, or have you guys kept it for any people, whether or not they were involved in the process, right? Just to see if it was actually effective or what are the things that could have been changed, things that you could perhaps apply for the next projects.
Yeah, we take a what's called a plus delta approach. So every project we do, we say, what are the pluses? What should we do again? What works? And what are the deltas? What are the things we would change? So we built that into our workshop process. And if we're able to, we try to do post-occupancy surveys. So yes, our continuous learning exercise, we do document what we will do differently, and we are looking for, we review things already. So, and a lot of what we've learned is from previous fire halls the city has actually built, that they brought their lessons learned to the table. So we're actively involved in that sharing of what can we improve going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Chef Raz. Pipa?
Sorry, Tamara, can you repeat that question? I was reading the chat at the same time you were saying it, and so now
No
I'm
worries. Basically just like a feedback channel. Is it open? Do you guys have it? Is it open, let's say, not just for the people involved, but even for like people who are just using it, but was not necessarily involved in the design process? And if not, do you think it would be useful?
Maybe it's a bit different because we're at the city, so we're a constant feedback channel in that sense. Like, after all the risk assessments, I do ask for feedback. So I do that different time periods. So for example, last year I reached out to all the different project managers who I worked with on risk assessments and said, what worked, what didn't, what did you implement? do you know what you've implemented? What we're really trying to figure out right now at the City of Calgary is implementation. What are we implementing? How much are we implementing? How do we track that? And that process is a big black box, but we are trying to figure that out and clarify it. And so the feedback is pretty important in that way. Also updating our process pretty consistently over the last few years to meet the needs of the consultants who we're working with, or folks across the city that we're working with. And then I follow up regularly after a project to, again, see what's been implemented, what's not. But yeah, it's less about, I mean, feedback is super important, and we gather that on our process. But for us, we need feedback from the project manager on what's been implemented and why not, and what were the barriers. So it's kind of a bit of a two-way relationship in that regard. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, definitely does. I think we have time for one last question for everyone. So from Ashley, what are some of the adaptation or resilience measures that stood out to you each? So we can start with Pipa.
Well, I guess I'll think about the transit one in particular. I am not a transit expert, and so I really didn't recognize any of the adaptation measures. Where sometimes with a building, you know, there are a lot of great adaptation measures like green roofs, building envelope, those kinds of things that you recognize and you see very commonly. But this is like upgrade the high steel rail strength for 7th Street between this and this. So it's just like, it's very different recommendations. So I suppose that was one of the benefits of engaging the subject matter experts and developing those adaptation measures and ranking them by feasibility. So a bit more of a general answer there.
Thank you. All our presenters, thank you so much. It was a very great they're very great presentations. And if you would have future building projects that would use PIEVC in the future, we would love to have you back in the webinar. So far, like this has been a really great discussion. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to almost every 2 to 3 months for everyone to be able to submit any ongoing or finished PIEVC projects that you currently have. So we have deadlines for on June for the July webinar, end of August for September webinar, and end of November for December webinar. So you can just send it to pievc@iclr.org. We will be personally looking through all the submissions, and even though you in the event that you don't present for the next one, we will always consider you for the next one, because we have ongoing all throughout the year.